Rhett Morgan rode his horse slowly along the dusty trail, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. The sun hung high, harsh and unyielding, casting shimmering waves across the golden sands and jagged rocks. He had been riding for hours, his throat dry, his lips cracked from the relentless wind. But Rhett was used to long journeys. Years of working cattle in the vast open lands had taught him how to endure the harshest conditions. Still, there was something different about this part of the desert. A strange emptiness seemed to follow him, as if the land itself was watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. He squinted against the sunlight, scanning the horizon. The rock formations in the distance were tall and sharp, rising like ancient sentinels from the earth. He knew he had to find shelter soon. The sand beneath his boots had grown hot enough to make his feet ache, and his horse, a sturdy bay named Dusty, was slowing under the heat and weight of the day. Rhett urged him on gently, whispering words of encouragement, though he himself was unsure whether they would reach the horse or just echo back from the rocks. As he moved deeper into the canyon, Rhett remembered the warnings the townsfolk had given him earlier that week. He had laughed when the old storekeeper spoke of the Desert Queen. "Don't wander too far," the man had said, his voice trembling slightly. "She's out there, watching, and if she wants you, she will find you." Rhett had chuckled and waved him off. He was a man of reason, a man who believed in work, in cattle, in tangible truths, not in myths whispered by frightened locals. But now, as he rode beneath the jagged cliffs and the wind howled through the narrow passageways, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The air in the canyon was different. It was cooler in the shade, but it carried an unfamiliar weight, a stillness that seemed almost unnatural. Every sound he made, his boots against the stirrups, Dusty's soft snorts, echoed sharply off the canyon walls. It made him uneasy. He tried to shake it off, blaming his nerves on thirst and fatigue. After all, he had faced storms, bandits, and wild animals before. A quiet canyon should be nothing to fear. Hours passed, and the trail became harder to follow. Loose stones shifted under Dusty's hooves, forcing Rhett to slow. He spotted a small outcropping ahead that promised some shade, and he led Dusty toward it. As he dismounted, Rhett wiped the sweat from his brow and tried to get his bearings. The desert, so vast and familiar in some areas, now felt like a maze of rocks and shadows. There was no wind to carry the usual scent of sagebrush and sand. Only silence. Rhett pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and took a long, grateful drink. The water was lukewarm but refreshing, giving him the strength to keep going. He examined the canyon walls. There were small caves and natural shelters carved into the rock, some large enough to stand in, others just hollowed indentations. He wondered if any of these could provide a safe resting place for the night. As he scanned the area, he thought he caught a movement in the corner of his eye, a flicker, a shadow darting between rocks. "Probably a lizard," he muttered to himself, trying to sound confident. But something about the motion had been too deliberate, too purposeful to be just an animal. He felt a tight knot in his stomach, a warning he didn't fully understand. Dusty shifted nervously beneath him, his ears flicking toward the same spot. Rhett patted the horse's neck, trying to reassure him, though he knew it was as much for himself as for Dusty. Rhett decided to explore one of the larger caves nearby. It was partially hidden behind a jutting rock, offering both shade and a vantage point to see anyone approaching. As he approached, he noticed markings on the rocks, scratches not deep but deliberate, like someone had traced shapes into the stone with care. He knelt to examine them closer. They were unfamiliar, not the work of nature. His heart beat a little faster. Who could have been here, and why? A sudden gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and something else. Something faint, metallic, almost like old coins or iron. Rhett straightened and looked around, trying to locate the source. The canyon walls stood tall and silent, casting long shadows that stretched across the sand like dark fingers. The wind picked up again, whistling through the rocks, and he thought he heard a faint voice whisper his name. He froze, scanning the rocks, but saw nothing. "Get a grip, Rhett," he muttered under his breath. "You've been riding too long. You're imagining things." He tried to convince himself, but the sense of being watched did not leave. Every time he moved, he felt a presence, something just out of sight, moving in rhythm with him. Dusty snorted and backed up slightly, his eyes wide. Rhett's hand went to the hilt of his knife, not that he expected to fight anything yet, but it was a small comfort to know he had some protection. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop, but the desert's chill was different from the cool mountain air he was used to. It was sharp, almost biting, and it seemed to make the shadows stretch and shift in impossible ways. He realized he would need to find a proper shelter soon. There was no way he could camp in the open, not with the feeling of unseen eyes upon him. Rhett continued moving cautiously, keeping close to the rock walls. Then he saw her. Or at least, he thought he did. Between two large boulders, a figure moved gracefully, almost like part of the rocks themselves. He froze, his heart thudding. The figure vanished the moment he blinked, leaving only the whispering wind behind. Rhett swallowed hard and tried to calm his racing mind. He remembered the stories again, the desert queen, the woman who lived alone, who could appear and disappear at will, who protected the land fiercely from intruders. He had laughed at those stories, called them old wives' tales. But now, as darkness fell and the shadows grew long, he could not deny the possibility that there was some truth to the legend. Rhett found a small ledge at the base of the canyon where he could rest, wedging himself against the rock for support. He tied Dusty to a nearby outcropping, giving the horse just enough rope to move but not wander off. As he unrolled his blanket and settled in for the night, he could not shake the feeling that he was not alone. Every crack in the rock, every whisper of the wind, seemed to hint at something waiting, watching, judging him. Sleep came fitfully. In his dreams, he saw the desert not as a barren place, but alive, moving, breathing, aware. Shadows shifted into shapes, some friendly, some dangerous. And always, there was a presence he could not name, a voice that spoke without words, telling him that he had entered a land where rules were different, where survival required more than skill with a horse or a gun. When he awoke, the first light of dawn filtered through the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of red and gold. The wind had calmed, but the silence remained. Rhett stretched and looked around, expecting to see something, anything, that could explain the feeling that had haunted him all night. And then he noticed it. A single footprint, not his own, pressed into the soft sand near where Dusty grazed. It was small, delicate, but unmistakably human, and it was facing him. Rhett's heart skipped a beat. He scanned the rocks, trying to locate the source, but saw nothing. His mind raced, questioning what he had seen, what he had felt. He had prepared for storms, for hunger, for loneliness. But he had not prepared for this. An encounter with someone who seemed to belong to the desert itself. Someone who might not even be entirely of the human world. He mounted Dusty carefully, keeping his eyes on every shadow, every movement in the canyon. He rode slowly, every muscle tense, aware that the desert held secrets he was only beginning to understand. The wind picked up again, and with it came that same whisper, soft, teasing, almost melodic. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Rhett swallowed hard, gripping the reins, knowing instinctively that his journey through this canyon had only just begun. Somewhere deep in the desert queen watched, silent and patient. And for the first time, Rhett Morgan understood that he had stepped into a world where the rules were not his own, and survival depended not just on skill, but on courage, and perhaps on trust. Rhett Morgan rode cautiously through the canyon, his eyes scanning every shadow and crack in the rocks. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, yet something about this place felt alive in a way he had never experienced. The whisper he had heard the previous morning still lingered in his mind, soft and teasing, as if carried on the wind. Dusty, his loyal horse, moved carefully under him, ears twitching nervously as if sensing a presence Rhett could not fully understand. The sun climbed higher, warming the canyon walls. Rhett needed water, shade, and a moment to collect his thoughts. But he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. He slowed his pace, guiding Dusty toward a small alcove in the rocks that promised shelter from the sun. The shadows here were long and cool, a relief from the blistering heat outside. Rhett dismounted, letting Dusty graze while he ran his hand along the rough stone, listening to the wind echo through the canyon. Then he saw her. At first, she was just a shape, almost blending with the reddish stone behind her. But the moment he recognized her posture, her presence, his heart leapt in both fear and curiosity. She was tall and confident, moving with a grace that seemed to belong to the desert itself. Her eyes caught the sunlight, glinting like the reflection of a distant mirage. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she observed him with a calm intensity that made Rhett feel both exposed and protected, as if he had stepped into a world he was not meant to enter. Who are you?" Rhett asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The woman smiled faintly, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that suggested power and experience, someone who had seen more than most men would in a lifetime. "I am Sahara," she said, her voice soft but firm, like the desert wind itself. "And you are far from where you belong." Rhett swallowed hard, unsure if he was relieved or more afraid. I'm just passing through. My cattle went missing and I got lost." "I mean no harm." Sahara's eyes studied him, sharp and unyielding. She seemed to see through him, through the layers of exhaustion, pride, and determination that Rhett tried to present. "The desert is not kind to those who underestimate it," she said, "and I do not take kindly to strangers wandering in my land uninvited." Rhett nodded quickly, realizing he had no choice but to be honest. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to intrude." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her presence filling the small alcove. Rhett felt a strange mixture of tension and curiosity, as though the desert itself had taken human form. She gestured toward a narrow path leading deeper into the canyon. "Follow me. You will not survive long on your own here." Rhett hesitated for only a moment before leading Dusty behind her. The path was narrow, twisting, and uneven, but Sahara moved effortlessly, as if the rocks themselves bent to her will. Rhett struggled to keep up, his legs burning from the climb, Dusty snorting under the strain. Yet he could not look away from her. There was something about the way she moved, the way she commanded the land, that was mesmerizing. As they walked, Rhett tried to make conversation. "How long have you lived out here?" he asked, glancing at her cautiously. "I have been here a long time," she replied, her tone neutral, neither inviting nor dismissive. "Long enough to understand the ways of the desert, long enough to know who belongs here and who does not." Rhett nodded, sensing that further questions would be met with silence. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, assessing, judging. The air between them was tense but not hostile. There was a strange kind of understanding growing, born of survival and necessity. Finally, Sahara led him to a hidden shelter carved into the canyon walls. It was a small cave but well kept, with signs of recent use, ashes from a fire, bundles of dried herbs, and containers of water. Rhett realized with a mixture of awe and relief that she had not only survived here but thrived. She had made the harsh desert her home. "You can rest here," she said, nodding toward the cave. "But do not think you are free to wander outside without caution. The desert has eyes, and not all who enter survive." Rhett set Dusty down and took a deep breath, letting the tension in his muscles ease slightly. He examined the shelter, impressed by its simplicity and practicality. "You live alone?" he asked cautiously. Sahara's expression hardened for a moment. "I am not alone. The desert watches, and I listen. That is enough." Rhett realized she spoke not only of solitude, but of a deep connection to the land, a bond that made her both guardian and part of the desert itself. He felt a respect growing inside him, tempered by the knowledge that he was, for now, entirely in her hands. As the day wore on, Rhett and Sahara spoke cautiously, carefully choosing words that revealed nothing yet hinted at understanding. He learned that she knew every ridge, every cave, and every hidden path in the canyon. She could predict the weather, sense approaching storms, and find water where none seemed to exist. Rhett listened, fascinated. He had ridden through many deserts, but he had never met anyone who moved through the land with such certainty and confidence. Sahara, in turn, asked questions, not about himself, but about the world beyond the canyon, about the people who lived in towns and cities, about the cattle that had gone missing. Her curiosity was sharp, almost like a test. Rhett answered honestly, sensing that deception would not survive her scrutiny. She did not smile, but there was a subtle approval in the way her eyes softened when he spoke the truth. By late afternoon, the shadows of the canyon grew long, stretching like fingers across the sand. Rhett realized he had been talking longer than he had intended, losing track of time in the presence of someone who commanded attention without trying. Sahara moved silently around the shelter, preparing a small fire for the evening, arranging water and food in a careful, methodical way. It was clear she had survived here for years, perhaps decades, mastering both the desert and herself. When night fell, the desert transformed. The sky above the canyon became a deep, endless blue, dotted with countless stars. The wind had died down, leaving an almost eerie silence. Rhett sat near the fire, watching the flames dance, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and awe. He had never encountered someone like Sahara before, someone who seemed at once human and part of the wilderness. Sahara joined him silently, sitting across the fire. She did not speak immediately, letting the crackling flames fill the space between them. Rhett wanted to ask more questions, but the weight of her presence made him cautious. Finally, she spoke. "You are far from home, Cowboy. The desert has a way of teaching lessons. Some survive, some do not. You must decide which you will be." Rhett nodded, understanding that her words were not a threat, but a warning. The desert could be merciless, and he had seen glimpses of that today. Yet he also sensed that she was not cruel. She was protective, even in her sternness. There was a code she followed, a rhythm to her life that was both harsh and beautiful. The fire burned low, and Rhett felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time since entering this canyon, he felt that he was not entirely alone. Sahara's watchful eyes, her careful movements, and her deep knowledge of the desert offered a sense of safety he had not expected. He realized that survival here required more than skill with a horse or knowledge of cattle. It required respect for the land, trust in those who truly understood it, and a willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. As he drifted toward sleep, Rhett reflected on the day's events. He had arrived in the canyon confident in his abilities, certain that he could navigate any challenge. Now he understood that confidence alone was not enough. The desert was vast, mysterious, and alive, and he had only just begun to uncover its secrets. Sahara watched him for a moment, her gaze steady and unblinking. She did not need to speak. Her presence itself was a message. Rhett was under her guidance, her protection, and for now, that was enough. The night passed quietly, with only the soft rustle of wind and the distant cry of a hawk breaking the silence. When morning came, Rhett awoke feeling stronger, more aware, and strangely grateful for the woman who had appeared when he had needed her most. He knew that the day ahead would bring new challenges, new lessons, and perhaps new dangers. But for the first time since entering the desert, he felt that he might survive them, not alone, but with someone who truly understood the land he had underestimated. And so, Rhett Morgan prepared to follow Sahara deeper into the canyon, stepping into a world that demanded courage, patience, and trust. The desert was no longer simply a landscape of sand and stone. It was a living challenge, and the desert queen who guided him was both its protector and its test. He was ready to learn, to endure, and perhaps to discover the truths hidden in the heart of the desert. Rhett followed Sahara deeper into the canyon, his eyes scanning every curve of the rock walls. The desert seemed to shift with each step, shadows stretching and twisting in ways that made him second-guess the terrain. Yet, despite the eerie quiet and the weight of the unknown pressing around him, he felt a growing sense of trust in Sahara. She moved with the certainty of someone who had lived among these rocks and sands for years, someone who could read the desert as easily as a book. As they walked, Rhett began to notice the small details he had missed before. The way Sahara's fingers traced the edges of the rocks, sensing their stability. The patterns in the sand she followed without hesitation. The tiny plants clinging to life in the cracks, which she identified by name and use. "These herbs can heal a cut or ease a fever," she explained softly, picking a small bundle and showing him how to crush the leaves gently. Rhett nodded, fascinated. He had ridden through deserts before, but he had never met anyone who could survive with such skill and knowledge, who seemed at once part of the land and completely in command of it. "Your life here? It's remarkable," Rhett said, keeping his voice low. "You've survived all this? Alone?" Sahara glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I was not always alone," she said, "but those I loved are gone. The desert, it has a way of taking things from you if you are not careful." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet weight of experience. Rhett sensed that she had lived through hardships most people could never imagine, that every movement and decision she made was guided by the lessons she had learned the hard way. They came to a small, natural spring hidden behind a bend in the rocks. Water trickled down from a narrow crack, forming a shallow pool surrounded by smooth stones. Rhett dismounted, letting Dusty drink first, while Sahara knelt by the water's edge, scooping a handful into her palm and sipping lightly herself. The cool water was a relief to Rhett, soothing his parched throat and easing the fatigue that had been building for days. As they rested, Rhett decided to ask the questions that had been lingering in his mind. "Why do they call you the Desert Queen?" he asked cautiously. "Is it just the stories, or is there more to it?" Sahara looked away, her gaze distant, focused on the shimmering heat waves rising from the rocks. "People fear what they do not understand," she said slowly. "I protect the canyon. I survive. That is enough for them to call me a queen, a legend, or whatever name suits their imaginations. But there is truth behind the stories, yes. A warning for those who would wander carelessly." Rhett nodded, feeling the weight of her words. It was clear that she had earned her reputation, not through tales or exaggeration, but through skill, resilience, and a deep connection to the desert. He could sense the strength she carried in every movement, in every quiet gesture. She did not boast. She simply existed in harmony with the land, commanding it by understanding it. Curiosity got the better of him, and he asked another question, softer this time. You mentioned people you loved. What happened? Sahara's eyes darkened slightly, and she remained silent for a moment. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of earth and stone. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. A long time ago, my family traveled with me through these lands. They were careless, unprepared for the desert's ways. One night, a storm came without warning, and they were taken. I survived, because I had learned the desert's secrets. But they did not. Rhett felt a lump in his throat. He could not imagine losing everyone he cared for, being left alone in such a vast, unforgiving place. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. I can't imagine how hard that must have been. Sahara gave a faint nod. It was not easy, but the desert teaches you to endure, to survive, and to protect what remains. You must remember that, cowboy. Here, every mistake has a consequence, and the land does not forgive easily. Rhett listened closely, realizing that her words carried more than personal history. They were lessons, warnings, and guidance all at once. He began to understand why she watched him so closely, why every movement and decision of his had been observed from the moment he entered the canyon. She needed to know if he could survive here, not just in body, but in understanding and respect for the desert. The day passed with a quiet rhythm. Sahara led him through hidden paths, showing him places where water could be found, where edible plants grew, and where the wind could warn of approaching danger. Rhett followed, absorbing everything, trying to match her calm, deliberate pace. He realized that the desert was more alive than he had imagined, and survival depended on knowledge, observation, and respect. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, they came across a set of tracks in the sand. Rhett studied them carefully. These aren't yours?" he asked. Sahara's eyes flicked toward the tracks. "No," she said, "and they are recent. Someone else has passed through here, perhaps looking for cattle or trouble." Her voice was calm, but the tension in her shoulders suggested she had seen similar signs many times before. Rhett's mind raced. "Cattle thieves?" he asked. "Perhaps," Sahara said, her gaze sharp, "or someone with ill intent. The desert attracts many kinds of people, some who take without thinking, some who survive by cunning. You must be cautious." Rhett felt a knot in his stomach. He had thought the hardest part of the journey was being lost and alone, but now he realized there were dangers he could not yet see, dangers that could strike without warning. Sahara's presence was both a comfort and a reminder that survival here required vigilance and skill. Night fell slowly, and the temperature dropped. The canyon became quiet, the only sounds the occasional rustle of small creatures in the rocks and the distant cry of a hawk. Sahara prepared a small fire near the shelter, arranging stones to contain it and gathering dry wood from hidden corners. Rhett watched, fascinated by the precision and care in her movements. Every gesture seemed deliberate, a part of her survival instinct honed over years in the desert. As the fire crackled, they sat in silence for a while, the orange glow illuminating their faces. Rhett felt a strange sense of connection growing between them. He had entered the desert as a stranger, wary and cautious, but now he realized he had much to learn, not just about survival, but about understanding, trust, and respect. Sahara finally spoke, breaking the quiet. "You have courage, cowboy," she said. "But courage alone is not enough here. You must also have patience, observation, and the willingness to learn. The desert tests all who enter it." Rhett nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He understood that she was not merely giving advice. She was preparing him, teaching him, guiding him through a world that had little mercy for the unprepared. "I will learn," he said quietly. I will do whatever it takes to survive here." Sahara's eyes softened slightly, though she remained composed. "Then you may yet survive," she said. "But know this, the desert does not forgive mistakes lightly, and I will not watch idly if you falter." The fire burned low, and the night deepened. Rhett settled near the shelter, his thoughts heavy with the lessons of the day and the presence of the woman who had appeared from the desert like a living legend. He reflected on the footprints, the hidden paths, and the tracks they had found. Danger could appear at any moment, yet he felt a strange comfort in knowing that Sahara was there, guiding him, watching, protecting. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of shifting sands, hidden caves, and fleeting shadows. He saw glimpses of the past Sahara had hinted at: storms, loss, survival, and strength. The desert in his dreams was alive, aware, and full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. When morning arrived, Rhett awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The desert was still harsh, still vast, but he felt stronger, more alert, and more determined. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges both seen and unseen. But he also knew that he had a guide, someone who understood the desert in ways he could not yet comprehend, someone who had survived and thrived against impossible odds. Rhett mounted Dusty, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Sahara led the way, moving effortlessly through the canyon, her eyes scanning every ridge and crevice. Rhett followed, absorbing her methods, learning her ways. The desert was no longer just a landscape of sand and stone. It was a living, breathing teacher, and Sahara was its most skilled interpreter. By midday, Rhett had begun to understand more about the desert's rhythms, the way the wind shifted, the subtle signs of approaching weather, the tracks of animals and humans alike. He realized that survival here required more than strength or determination. It required observation, respect, and a willingness to learn from someone who had mastered the land. Sahara spoke little, but her instructions were clear, precise, and often unspoken. Rhett watched and learned, following her example. Each day he grew stronger, more confident, and more attuned to the desert's ways. He began to understand that the stories about the Desert Queen were not mere legend. They were truth, told through the experiences of someone who had lived and survived in this harsh, beautiful, and dangerous place. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Rhett felt a bond forming, not only with Sahara but with the desert itself. He realized that his journey was no longer just about finding lost cattle or surviving a harsh landscape. It was about learning, understanding, and growing in a place that tested every aspect of his being. And through it all, the woman who called herself Sahara remained his guide, his protector, and, in ways he did not yet fully understand, the key to surviving the desert's trials. The desert sun hung low, casting long shadows across the canyon as Rhett followed Sahara through a narrow pass. The rocks here were jagged, sharp-edged, and unyielding, their surfaces heated by hours of relentless sunlight. Dusty moved cautiously beneath him, picking his steps carefully, while Rhett's eyes darted between the canyon walls, alert for any sign of danger. The lessons from the previous days were fresh in his mind. The desert was unpredictable, alive, and full of hidden perils. Sahara moved ahead with ease, her steps silent yet confident. She seemed part of the canyon itself, reading its curves, dips, and shadows like a living map. Rhett admired her skill, but there was a tension in the air he could not ignore. The tracks they had seen the day before, the ones not made by them, were still fresh in his mind. He remembered Sahara's words. The desert attracts many kinds of people. Not all have good intentions. Now more than ever, he understood why she remained vigilant. As they rounded a bend, the faint sound of voices reached Rhett's ears. At first, he thought it might be the wind, but then he heard the distinct clatter of boots on stone and the low murmur of conversation. Rhett froze, signaling Dusty to stop. He glanced at Sahara, who was already moving quietly toward a small cluster of boulders that offered partial cover. Her movements were fluid, precise, and deliberate, almost like a predator stalking prey. "They're close," she whispered, her eyes sharp, scanning the rocks ahead. "Men, likely the ones searching for your cattle." Rhett's heart pounded. He had not expected to encounter danger so soon, not in the seemingly quiet canyon. But now, standing beside Sahara, he realized just how vulnerable he had been. The desert could be beautiful, mesmerizing even, but it could also be merciless. He followed her lead, keeping low, his hands gripping Dusty's reins tightly. The voices grew louder as they approached a narrow section of the canyon where the rocks formed a natural corridor. Rhett could make out the shape of 3 men moving cautiously, their eyes scanning the rocks for any sign of movement. They carried ropes and tools, clearly prepared for work, and Rhett recognized them immediately. Cattle thieves, just as Sahara had suspected. Sahara stopped suddenly, pressing her hand against Rhett's shoulder. "Stay very still," she whispered. "One wrong move, and they'll see us." Rhett held his breath, trying to calm the surge of adrenaline that coursed through his veins. Dusty shifted nervously beneath him, and Rhett patted the horse's neck to soothe him. The men passed dangerously close, mere feet away, their attention fixed on the path ahead, oblivious to the hidden figures in the shadows. Suddenly, one of the thieves stumbled over a loose stone, and his foot scraped against the rock. Rhett flinched, but Sahara acted instantly. She reached out and pressed him against the wall of the canyon, pinning him with gentle yet firm strength. "Stay silent," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "You belong to me now." The words sent a shiver down Rhett's spine. There was no threat in her tone, only a fierce determination to protect him. He pressed himself against the rock, heart racing, and watched as the men passed by, narrowly missing them. The air was thick with tension, and every second felt like an eternity. When the thieves were finally out of sight, Sahara released Rhett, her expression calm but alert. "That was too close," she said. "The desert does not forgive carelessness. You must always be aware, always alert." Rhett nodded, his hands still trembling slightly from the encounter. He realized just how much he had underestimated the dangers of the canyon and how fortunate he was to have Sahara by his side. Her quick thinking, her knowledge of the terrain, and her ability to remain composed under pressure had saved him, and perhaps even Dusty, from harm. They continued moving through the canyon, taking a more concealed route that followed the natural curves of the rocks. Sahara led them to a small alcove, hidden from view, where they could rest and assess the situation. Rhett dismounted, letting Dusty graze while he caught his breath. The encounter had left him shaken, but also more aware of the desert's realities. As they rested, Sahara spoke, her voice calm but carrying an edge of warning. "The men who pass through here are dangerous. They take what they want and leave nothing behind. We must be careful. You are learning, but the desert will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Rhett listened, absorbing her words. He realized that the desert was not merely a backdrop for his journey. It was a living entity, full of challenges, lessons, and hidden dangers. Sahara's presence made him feel safer, but it also reminded him that survival depended on vigilance, skill, and understanding. Later, as the sun dipped below the canyon walls, painting the rocks in shades of orange and red, Sahara prepared a small fire. She arranged stones to contain it and gathered dry wood from hidden corners, moving with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. Rhett watched, fascinated by her methodical approach, and realized that her survival was not luck. It was the result of experience, observation, and careful planning. As the fire crackled, They sat in silence for a while, the glow illuminating their faces. Rhett reflected on the day's events, the tracks, the men, the close call in the canyon corridor. He realized that he had learned more in these few days than he had in years of traveling through deserts. The desert demanded respect, awareness, and patience, and Sahara had shown him how to meet those demands. Sahara finally broke the silence. "You are improving," she said. "But remember, courage alone is not enough. You must also think ahead, anticipate danger, and trust your instincts. The desert will test you, and only those who learn its lessons survive." Rhett nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He knew that his journey was no longer just about finding lost cattle or surviving harsh terrain. It was about understanding the desert, learning from it, and earning the right to navigate its hidden dangers. And he knew that he could not have done this without Sahara, who had not only guided him but also protected him when danger came too close. Night settled over the canyon, and the temperature dropped sharply. The desert became quiet, with only the soft rustle of the wind and the distant cries of nocturnal creatures breaking the silence. Rhett sat near the fire, reflecting on the events of the day. He had entered the canyon with confidence, believing he could handle anything. Now he realized that the desert had lessons to teach him, lessons that required humility, observation, and trust in those who knew its ways. Sahara watched him from across the fire, her gaze steady and unyielding. She had seen many travelers come and go, some failing, some surviving. There was something different about Rhett, something that made her believe he could endure the trials ahead. Yet she knew better than to underestimate the desert or its dangers. Every shadow, every sound, every shift in the wind could signal a threat. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. Rhett felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. He had faced danger today, seen the desert's merciless side, and survived. But he also understood that this was only the beginning. The desert held more challenges, more lessons, and perhaps more encounters with those who would test his courage and skill. Sahara spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "Tomorrow will bring new tests. You must be ready. Remember what you learned today. The importance of observation, patience, and trust. The desert will always be watching. And so must you." Rhett nodded, feeling a growing respect for the woman who had become both his guide and protector. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that he was not alone. With Sahara by his side, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and confidence, ready to face whatever challenges the desert had in store. As the night deepened, Rhett finally allowed himself to rest, knowing that the desert was still alive, still watching, and still full of hidden dangers. He had survived today, but survival was only the first step. The desert demanded more: patience, skill, and understanding, and he was determined to meet its expectations, guided by the desert queen who had saved him when he needed it most. The canyon remained silent, the stars twinkling overhead, and Rhett closed his eyes. Feeling the weight of the day and the lessons he had learned, he knew that the desert would test him again, and he welcomed the challenge, ready to grow stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the land that had already begun to shape him in ways he had never imagined. The morning sun broke over the canyon, spilling golden light across the jagged rocks. The desert was alive with color, its beauty stark and overwhelming after the tension of the previous day. Rhett Morgan rose with Dusty, stretching muscles stiff from the night. He felt alert, determined, and aware of every sound and movement around him. The desert was quiet, but he knew it could change in an instant, just as it always had. Sahara was already awake, moving with the same precision and ease she had shown since the moment he met her. She checked the small shelter, gathered supplies, and prepared a minimal breakfast. Rhett watched, admiring her skill and efficiency. Every gesture she made was purposeful, reflecting the years she had spent mastering survival in a place that could be as deadly as it was beautiful. "You are ready," she said finally, her voice calm. "Today, the canyon will show you what it truly means to navigate the desert." Rhett nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and caution. He had learned much from her: how to observe the landscape, how to anticipate danger, and how to respect the land. But he knew that the desert still held challenges he could not yet predict. He trusted Sahara, but he also understood that he needed to rely on his own growing skills. They set out along a hidden trail, one that wound along the cliffs and through narrow passes. The canyon walls rose high around them, casting long shadows that danced with the shifting sun. Rhett kept his eyes open, noting every footprint, every broken twig, every sound carried on the wind. He moved with care, understanding that the desert could hide danger in even the most beautiful places. As they reached a bend in the canyon, they saw signs of recent activity: tracks in the sand, broken branches, and disturbed stones indicated that the men who had passed through the day before had returned. Rhett's heart beat faster, but Sahara's calm demeanor steadied him. "They are close," she whispered, "but we are ready." Sahara led them along a more concealed path, one that climbed higher and offered a view of the canyon below. Rhett could see the men moving cautiously along the lower trails, unaware of their presence above. He felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The desert had tested him before, but this was different. This was a challenge he could meet with skill, preparation, and the guidance of someone who knew every secret of the land. Sahara gestured for him to dismount. "We will observe first," she said. "Then we will decide how to proceed. Patience is key." Rhett watched as she scanned the terrain, her eyes moving with the precision of a hawk. She pointed out weak spots, hidden crevices, and escape routes. He realized how much he had learned in the past few days, not just about survival, but about thinking ahead, reading the land, and understanding the flow of movement. He felt more confident than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The men below began to move toward a small corral, where Rhett knew some of his missing cattle had been. Sahara's expression hardened. "They are taking what does not belong to them," she said. "We cannot allow that." Rhett nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He felt a surge of determination. He had come to the desert seeking answers, seeking survival, and perhaps a sense of purpose. Now he realized that protecting what was rightfully his and helping to stop those who would harm the land or others was part of that purpose. Sahara led him down a hidden path, careful to remain unseen. They approached the corral quietly, using rocks and shadows for cover. Rhett's heart raced as he took in the scene. The men were moving the cattle, focused on their task, unaware of the two figures watching from above. Sahara signaled for him to stay low, and then she moved forward with the confidence of someone who had mastered every step. She created a diversion, using stones and small noises to draw the men's attention without revealing their position. Rhett followed, heart pounding, ready to act if needed. The thieves scattered, confused by the sudden disturbances. Sahara took advantage of the chaos, moving swiftly to confront them. Rhett felt a surge of admiration. She was calm, precise, and commanding, a force of nature that the desert itself seemed to respect. The men tried to regroup, but Sahara's strategy and knowledge of the terrain left them with no advantage. Rhett stepped forward cautiously, helping guide Dusty as they moved to ensure the cattle were safe. Together, he and Sahara worked methodically, using the landscape to their advantage, keeping the men at bay until they finally retreated, defeated and frustrated. The corral was safe. The cattle accounted for, and the immediate danger had passed. Rhett felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, but he had survived, and not alone. Sahara stood beside him, her expression calm but satisfied. "You have done well," she said. "But remember, this is only one lesson. The desert will always have more." They led the cattle back toward safer paths, taking care to remain hidden from any others who might be following. The journey was slow and careful, but Rhett felt a growing confidence. He was learning not just to survive, but to understand the desert, to read its signs, and to work with someone who had mastered it. As they rested for the night near a hidden spring, Rhett reflected on the days that had passed. He had come to the canyon seeking lost cattle and perhaps adventure, but he had found something much more valuable: knowledge, skill, and a connection to the land and to someone who truly understood it. Sahara had guided him, protected him, and challenged him in ways he could never have imagined. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the rocks. Rhett felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect for the woman who had become his guide and protector. He realized that the desert was no longer just a place of hardship. It was a teacher, and Sahara was the most skilled interpreter of its lessons he had ever met. As dawn approached, Rhett faced a choice. He could leave the canyon, return to the towns and plains he had known all his life, and continue his work with the cattle, leaving the desert and its secrets behind. Or he could stay, continue learning, continue exploring, and perhaps discover more about the land, the desert queen, and himself than he had ever imagined. He looked at Sahara, who was already preparing for the day, scanning the horizon with the calm confidence of someone who had seen and survived everything the desert could throw at her. He felt a pull toward the canyon, toward the challenge and beauty of the land, and toward the woman who had shown him that survival was more than strength. It was awareness, understanding, and trust. Finally, Rhett spoke, his voice steady and clear. "I'm not leaving. Not yet. There's more to learn here, and I want to face it, with your guidance." Sahara regarded him silently for a moment, her eyes measuring, sharp and discerning. Then she nodded slightly, a faint acknowledgement of respect and trust. "Then you will stay," she said. "But know this: the desert does not forgive mistakes. You must be ready always and respect its lessons. Only then will you truly belong here." Rhett felt a sense of determination and purpose he had never known. He realized that staying in the canyon was not just about survival. It was about growth, understanding, and embracing a world that demanded courage, patience, and respect. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, but he had learned from them, and he was ready to continue. The desert stretched before them, vast and breathtaking, filled with shadows and sunlight, danger and beauty. Rhett knew that he and Sahara would face many challenges, but he felt prepared. Together they would navigate the canyon, protect the land, and uncover the secrets that had drawn him here. The adventure was not over. It had only just begun. As they rode deeper into the canyon, Rhett felt a sense of belonging he had never expected to find in the desert. The land was alive, the air was filled with possibility, and he was ready to meet whatever came next. The desert had tested him, guided him, and now offered him a chance to grow stronger, wiser, and more attuned to its rhythms. Sahara rode beside him, silent but watchful, a living symbol of resilience, skill, and mastery of the land. Rhett knew that he had found not just a guide, but a partner in understanding the desert's mysteries. Together, they would continue the journey, navigating the canyon with care, respect, and determination. The sun climbed higher, warming the rocks and the sand. Rhett felt a sense of calm and excitement intertwined. The desert had shown him its harshness, its beauty, and its lessons. He had survived, learned, and chosen to remain. And in that choice he found purpose, connection, and the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The canyon echoed with their footsteps, a rhythm of life, courage, and endurance. The desert watched, silent and eternal, acknowledging a new chapter in its history. The story of a cowboy who had arrived lost and weary, and a desert queen who had guided him, protected him, and taught him the ways of the land. Rhett Morgan rode forward, ready for the future, ready to learn, and ready to face the desert with the wisdom and courage he had earned. And for the first time, he understood that belonging was not about ownership. It was about respect, trust, and the choice to rise to the challenges of a world far greater than oneself.